Now, when we're coaching people with attitudes, we have to remember every single day, whether conscious or subconscious, employees make a choice about their attitude, how they're going to react to things. Now, it can also be learned behaviors. You know, that person who we always say something to and it always seems to have a spiteful or angry or saucy response. That's tough, right? But a lot of times what we forget is we can't change an attitude through a demand. We can't simply go up to someone and say, Charlie, you have a bad attitude, cut it out. He doesn't hug you and say, thanks for the revelation, I'm cured, I'm better. An attitude is a daily choice. Now I'm going to share a little humor with you. Some people who have negative attitudes have had years of practicing that attitude. So us just showing up once or twice to coach to that attitude is not suffice. So let's go through some strategies. First of all, the first thing we want to do is have an awareness conversation. The objective isn't to win them over or to get in an argument, but to plant a seed. They'll decide if it's going to grow. Most will not let it grow in that first conversation, but you've planted the seed. Number 2, effort stage. What you're looking for in the first 4 weeks, or typically 4 to 5 weeks, is effort. Are they willing to produce a more consistent, thoughtful attitude? Progress. Are they showing progress? Are you observing it? Are you acknowledging it? Are you rewarding it? And the result stage is when the attitude becomes predictable, sustainable, consistent, and always positive. So when we think about the average workday, think about it. We get up at 6. Some of us have to get our kids off to school. We're stressed. How often do we use the words, I'm running late? And then around noon, we have lunch. And then our lunch settles. So about mid-afternoon, we're kind of tired. By 5 o'clock, typically most of us are going home. Around 6 o'clock. Then doesn't it feel like a whole nother day starts? Got to pick our kids up. We got to have dinner with our spouse. Or we've got to shovel the walk or cut the lawn. It's like a whole nother day starts. And inherently, there are a lot of stresses. So how do we combat those stresses during the workday? What can we do to help our people? So, what do we know about employees in general? 1, they hate change. 2, when was the last time someone came in your office and said, boss, I'm stagnant. I could use some uncomfortable change to get me out of my comfort zone. I bet you're laughing. How often do we hear employees say, I just want to do my job and go home? So the attitude is something that most will not cultivate on their own. How many employees do you have that go onto YouTube or Vimeo looking for inspirational videos to inspire themselves? Sounds weird, doesn't it? So our relationship with attitude is really critical. As a coach, we have to have a positive relationship. When I look at somebody with a negative attitude, I think, man, this is a cool opportunity to turn somebody around, where most people wouldn't even entertain trying. So our relationship can really change our approach. We have to look at it not as this arduous thing, but an investment. It can improve the reception of our coaching, not just to that person who might have a bad attitude, but everybody on the team. Let me share a quick story. This is a young man who's probably not so young anymore, who worked at one of our client sites. His name is Chris Yerdell, great guy. And we had a really critical first conversation. I mean, Chris's job was more or less on the line at one point, and he's a good guy. And I sat down with him and had a very aggressive first conversation, which is not what I would recommend. But I mean, we were in the bottom of the 9th inning. We were at dire straits with Chris. And I sat down with him and I said, what are you willing to do? He said, anything you ask. I said, awesome. I said, why are your sales low? He was a salesperson. He said, my manager's not very good. Keep in mind, he's 23 years old. I said, okay, well, what else? This company doesn't know how to market themselves. Did I tell you he was 23 years old? So what I did is I said, Chris, I'm willing to help you, but I have a rule of engagement for you. He said, sure, whatever you want. I said, great. You are not allowed to use the word manager or marketing for the next 6 months. Now, he looked at me very arduously, didn't really agree, but he begrudgingly agreed. Then the next steps, about 45 days later, his boss, Jeff, calls me. Great guy, great coach, by the way, and said, I don't like your coaching at all. And I said, what's going on? He said, Tim, he is out in the cubicles serving pizza to his teammates. I said, oh, good. He said, Tim, this has nothing to do with sales. I said, nope. I said, Jeff, what are you looking at? He said, well, he's out there laughing and giggling with his teammates and he's sitting there and he stops. I said, Jeff, I should probably have looped you in. That's my fault. But one of his learning projects is every week he has to do a random act of kindness. And he has to invest, because if we can build up relationships around him, it'll neutralize his attitude. Number 2, he needs help from his teammates. Now, I don't deserve the credit. His boss, Jeff, certainly does. But his sales that year went from 71 to 119%. That's the creative power of coaching. I never did any tactical sales coaching. So coaching is a very creative tool we can use. Another example, one of my favorite people in the world, Bryce Jacobson. Great company, Swift Communication. He was reluctant as a coach in the beginning, but he started to use something called nonverbal coaching. And he had some challenging employees at one point, and he started to use 30-second coaching, calling him into his office for the good stuff. Then he would write a handwritten note. Then he would acknowledge people positively in a staff meeting. This is exactly how he started. Here's the cool thing. Calls me up months later, he goes, this stuff is awesome. It's really not that awesome, but he was having awesome results. He said, I'm changing the way people feel. I said, yeah, it doesn't take a lot. It's not rocket science. People are engaged when people lead with positive things 8 times more than when we lead with constructive things. That's what affects attitudes. So when you think about the attitude coaching experience, we have to think about questions. Questions give us clarity. We have to facilitate experiences. Years ago at Evan Root Johnson in their call center with over 115 people, we literally had breaks, scheduled breaks, where people would walk. One week we had Marathon Fast Walker Week, where you had to imitate a marathon walker. The following week we had High Five Week, where you had to high five people walked by you and you had to count the number of high fives you got on the way to the bathroom or coffee break. And these people thought I was nuts. They couldn't even believe I was getting paid all this money to do this. Here's the funny thing. Our customer service metrics went from the 75th percentile to the 93rd. Our sales in the next 3 programs went up 22, 31, and 74%. Why? Motion creates emotion. We were changing attitudes. Random acts of kindness. Take the time and put a note on somebody's desk. Send a card home. You will fuel their mind. We had one company where the attitude, really quite frankly, was prevalent at every department. And we had the whole company read Our Iceberg is Melting by John Cotter. It's about a penguin community. Here's the cool thing. Everybody had to participate in group conversations of what they learned from the book, but here was the next big question. They had to commit to people from across departments, mind you, what they were willing to change so the culture became better. Within 12 months, it was a vastly different company. So we can coach to attitudes. It takes time. So here's one that I love. At a client of ours, we had a receptionist who just hated me, did not like me, went around the company really criticizing me. And I had someone come up to me and say, I'm going to blast her. And I said, no, she has every right to dislike me. There's no rule because I was hired that everyone has to like me. So we get in a staff meeting. I look at her and I said, Katie, I got to tell you, I got a couple calls and she sits up like she's ready to get into an argument. And I said, these guys are praising you. I really appreciate the way you handled those phone calls. So I neutralized her. Here's the funny thing. I then pulled her aside with the owner of the company and I said, I want you to think about something. And she said, what's that? I said, I think you would be a great salesperson. 10 years later, she is still in sales from a receptionist. Positive, upbeat, keeps in touch with me. Did not like me initially, and that's okay. So attitudes can be changed, but this is a daily choice people make. Our job is to help them make a positive one. So attitude is everything. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. So there's 2 sides of change. We can embrace it or fight it. And I love this. If you have that person on your team who's really struggling with their attitude, what you do not prevent, you permit. And if you have that attitude that's pervasive and you ignore it, now you might lose the trust of the whole team. So the goal is to get the employees to work on themselves and move in the right direction. So again, you cannot change an attitude without the power of questions. Self-actualize. Chris, what are you going to do to positively interact with your teammates? Susie, on a scale of 1 to 6, 6 being you're positive and upbeat all the time, and 1, you can be a little choppy at times. Typically, they answer between 2 and 3. Well, gee, Susie, what do we need to do together as a team to move towards a 6? And what's the first step we should take together? Third party. Tom, if your best friend were here right now and he had to honestly describe your attitude with an adjective, what do you think he would say? See, these questions are designed to give perspective. And when we give perspective, we help them make the right choice. I hope this has helped. Send me an email. Let me know.